We have before us the MacBook Pro 16 M1 Pro and the Asus Republic of Gamers Zephyrus M16. And here are the benchmarks that are going to be coming up in just a few minutes. Now, right off the bat, if you're a creative professional considering one of these two laptops, but you also really love to do some gaming on the side as you're doing your chill time, I would definitely lean you towards the M16. The MacBook Pro lineup is fantastic for productivity, for creator apps, for 3D modeling. But as we lean towards gaming, the M16 is far more optimized. Dedicated GPU, the i9 processor, it just makes much more sense to go with a laptop that was built for gaming rather than a productivity and creator laptop that can do some video editing through emulations and different programs to make it compatible with gaming. Now that's my personal opinion, but I think a lot of you in the community would agree. So if you want to give some people some support on which laptop they should consider for gaming, comment below and give me some backup or tell me I'm wrong. I love to hear both sides of the opinion. Okay, now let's jump into the build quality before we get into the performance benchmarks later in the video. Now we have a magnesium alloy chassis on the Asus Republic of Gamers Zephyrus M16, which I'm just going to call the M16 for the purpose of this review. And we have an all aluminum chassis on the MacBook Pro 16. Now, in regards to thin and lightness, the M16 is gonna be slightly lighter if I'm feeling, my hand weight, but they are almost identical if they're not the exact same. But then as we get into the thinness of the laptop, the MacBook Pro wins out, and you can see those stats coming up on the screen now. It's almost a half an inch or maybe a quarter inch thinner as you get towards the back of the chassis. As you're up towards more the front of the keyboard deck on the chassis, they almost become the same height, but up here around the back, it pops up a little bit because of this foot down here at the bottom of the chassis. It's a really thick foot. What that does is it puts the computer up in the air a little more, allow more airflow to come through to cool the laptop better. And we'll get into some thermal temperatures later in the video as well. Now, if you're considering one of these two laptops for your virtual meetings, well, you're in luck because they both have webcams. Now, the G15 does not have a webcam, so if you're like, ooh, M16 or G15 versus MacBook Pro, I would lean you towards the M16 if a webcam is a high priority to you, as it does have a webcam. And here's a quick sample of both webcams for you. Here is a test of the webcam. It's a 1080p webcam. Checking out the audio as well to see if you like the webcam, see if it fits for your needs. It's definitely better than the crappy 720p webcams we've had forever. So I'm super stoked that Apple made this move for the 1080p. The webcam for the ROG Zephyrus M16 looks good. It's a little on the cool side as far as the temperature is concerned. A little bit grainy, but overall it'll do the trick for any web meetings you might have. Now let's go ahead and jump into the ports really quick. On the MacBook Pro, we have two USB Type-Cs, which are Thunderbolt 4, brought back the MagSafe port as well as your headphone jack. On the other side, we have HDMI, another USB Type-C Thunderbolt 4, and an SD card slot. Coming over here to the M16, we do have two USB Type-Cs, which are Thunderbolt as well, a headphone jack, USB Type-A, RJ45, HDMI, and your power adapter port. On the other side, we have a micro SD card slot as well as a USB Type-A. Now, as far as this micro SD card slot is concerned, for me, that's not really a productivity port. It's more of a storage port. So I think about being an on-the-go creator. If you're somebody who doesn't want to carry a bunch of big chunky SSDs along with you, you can bring some micro SD card slots, slide those in for some extra backup and storage. Maybe you have like 2 or 3 512s if you're on a big shoot, just back up your footage on a micro SD card. I think that could be a great option. It's not going to be, the super efficient SD card slot where you're on a shoot, load your footage in really quickly. To me, not a lot of people are using micro SD card slots unless you're, a big drone footage shooter. I know the DJI drones have micro SD cards in them. Maybe something else does that I'm not, thinking of. Comment below and let me know. But overall, I feel like productivity port, SD card slot, storage port, micro SD card slot. Just my opinion. Love to know your thoughts on that. Also, before we get too far into the review, I got a little ahead of myself. Let's check out the open and close test as well as the screen flex. So let's try and open and close both of these laptops with one hand. Easily open with one hand. There's a little bit of grab on that magnetic shut on both laptops. You got to really kind of get it to pop up, and then they open easily with one hand. Let's go check out the screen flex. That's one thing I really like about the MacBook Pro this year is the screen flex is almost non-existent. I mean, I have to really work at getting it to flex. And when I do that, I end up just moving the computer around. As we move to the M16, a predominant amount of screen flex is present with this screen. And so if you're one who's really concerned about screen flex, the MacBook Pro is going to be your choice. And then at the bottom of the screen for the M16, there's a little screen flex as well. For the MacBook Pro, because there's that dual hinge setup with the singular bar spanning the entire screen, you don't have any screen flex at the bottom of the screen. Let's swing these two laptops around really quickly and check out the keyboards. Now, the keyboards on these two laptops are actually surprisingly similar. We have the arrow keys, almost the exact same setup here. We have these small arrow keys, we have a full-size shift key, the enter key, and then we do have this kind of odd stack of keys here comparatively. This is a bit of a wider key, the slash key compared to on the MacBook Pro. But then as we move up towards the delete and even the power button, it's all basically located in the same area. Now, one thing that I will say I like a lot about the Zephyrus M16 is you can quickly jump into the command center to control the fan modes, control kind of the battery settings, and things along those lines. On the MacBook Pro, you won't have access to those types of features as it's not really customizable in that way. Because the Zephyrus is a gaming laptop, you're gonna have far more customization in the command center. Well, not just far more, you're actually gonna have that customization in the command center where you're not gonna have that on the MacBook Pro. You are able to change some of the screen profiles and screen settings on the MacBook Pro, but all of the fan modes are not controllable on the MacBook Pro where they are on the M16. Now, the MacBook Pro is way more efficient and way more intelligent. Sorry, I don't mean that M16 isn't intelligent. It's just way more intuitive of its hardware and software. And so you're not gonna see this laptop get very hot. You're not gonna see this laptop have a lot of fan noise until you're editing 6K red footage and 6K B-RAW in Premiere Pro, where you're gonna see a little more fan noise and a little more thermals on some more basic tasks, such as Photoshop work, which when you're considering Photoshop, the MacBook Pro only took the temperatures up to 41 degrees Celsius, which on the M16, it was slightly higher, and I'll put those results up on the screen because they're slipping my mind at this exact moment. Now, as we took that little detour about the thermals and fan noise, which we'll get into a little more in depth later in the performance section, let's go ahead and actually look at the keyboards. The keyboard on the M16 has a little longer key travel, a little more of a soft touch and slightly quieter. The MacBook Pro has a shorter key travel and it's a little clicky. It's got that scissor switch click to it. I like the sound of it, that clickiness, but if you're wanting more of a quiet keyboard, if you're typing in an office space or in classrooms, I would honestly lean you towards the M16. Now, moving down to the trackpad, I'm gonna spin these two around here. And as you can see, though the M16 has a large trackpad, nothing compares to the MacBook Pro's massive trackpad. Now, this is a vibration click, so if you're new to the Apple ecosystem with these vibration click trackpads, basically it simulates a click through certain vibrations to tell your finger and your brain you've made a click. Where on the M16, it is a manual click trackpad, but it's still very quiet for a manual click. It's not super loud and clicky. If I'm gonna pick a trackpad on all gaming laptops, this and the G15 are my favorite trackpad of the year. But if I'm gonna pick any trackpad, I really do like the MacBook Pros a lot. The only thing that I get frustrated about the MacBook Pro is it occasionally has some dragging and dropping issues. Like I go to drag something and it just like gets confused. It doesn't drag. It just kind of sits there as I'm dragging my finger. This doesn't happen all the time, but I have noticed it quite a few times while using the MacBook Pro. Because this is a manual trackpad, you're much less likely to have that same issue. Now, I'm gonna give you a quick audio sample of me using both keyboards and trackpads so you can hear them for yourself. And for a quick audio sample of the speakers on the MacBook Pro and the M16, here's an audio sample for you as well. You do have downward facing speakers on the M16 as well as these upward facing support like bass/tweeter speakers. And then you have all of the audio coming out of the speakers here on top of the MacBook Pro. All right, let's swing back around and take a look at the screens. These are both 16-inch screens. However, the MacBook Pro is slightly taller because of the notch. Let me slide it down here a little bit so you can see that. So as you can see, the MacBook Pro is just slightly taller because of that notch. You get about an extra 1/4 inch, I would say, maybe a 1/2 inch, but it looks more like a 1/4 inch without pulling out the old measuring tape or ruler. And you're also gonna get a brighter screen on the MacBook Pro. The M16 still has great brightness, but this one came in at around 900, the high 900 nits, where the M16 was not that high. I'm gonna pull up the color gamut range, color accuracy, and screen brightness results on the screen right now so you can see those. And also keep in mind that there's a higher resolution with the MacBook Pro screen than there is the M16. The M16 is still sharp, it's still very crisp and clear. I like the screen a lot, but I mean, from a spec standpoint alone, the MacBook Pro is a better screen objectively. Now, one of the biggest arguments is which laptop is more powerful. And I want to have a quick discussion about my thoughts on the powerfulness of each of these laptops. And if you're considering one of these laptops for a buying decision, what my full perspective is on the true comparison of these two laptops. The Apple MacBook Pro 16, M1 Pro, and M1 Max are masters of efficiency. Okay, these two laptops, the M1 Pro and the M16, which has the i9-11900H with the RTX 3060, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 1 terabyte SSD, is neck and neck in performance with this laptop as a whole. Sure, there's going to be some benchmarks that stick up for the MacBook Pro. There's going to be some benchmarks that stick up for the M16, but they're basically neck and neck. So here is where the rubber meets the road, and we're going to talk about battery life in this discussion. Okay, this MacBook Pro 16 can run full performance on battery power. You don't need to be plugged into a charger cable into the wall to get full performance. The M16, you are required to plug in to the wall with your charger cord to get full performance. And that is where the big argument happens between Apple fanboys and Windows fanboys, which I try to put myself right in the middle of. I don't want to be on either camp. I want to give you valuable purchasing knowledge, not be a fanboy of each one. But if I were going to be a fanboy, I would be a fanboy of the optimal performance that this laptop has on battery power and great battery life. And I'll pull the battery life results up on the screen right now. If I'm a fanboy of the Windows, I'm going to say this is a far more budget-friendly laptop, but you need to bring your charger cable along and you need to plug in to get full performance. The battery results you're seeing now on the screen are of the M16 running iGPU mode, which means you are not getting any GPU performance when you're obtaining the battery life you see on the screen. So that means that if you want a laptop with full performance while on the go, not need to be plugged into a charger, the MacBook Pro is worth the double. The MacBook Pro is worth the extra cost you will incur to purchase this machine. Now, if you're curious about the exact pricing and availability of either of these models, you can head down in the description below and click one of those links. Now, if you do use that link to make a purchase, I will get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. But of course, that's what keeps this channel alive and the helpful content coming your way. And for those of you who say, why aren't you listing the price on the screen? According to FTC regulations, prices change so rapidly, especially during the holiday seasons, that it is actually not legal to list the prices on the screen. So just a little legal information there for you. Okay, let's jump into the performance benchmarks. First and foremost, like I said, we have the base model of the MacBook Pro 16 M1 Pro, and we have the i9-11900H, RTX 3060, and 16 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of SSD. Now, as far as the upgrade path is concerned, once you purchase the MacBook Pro, no more upgrade. Everything is soldered to the motherboard. You cannot upgrade this on your own. You are stuck. You can upgrade and add a SSD drive to the M16, and you can swap one of the RAM sticks. So you cannot swap both of the RAM sticks, but you can swap one of them. So this laptop could head up to 24 or 40 gigs of RAM if you so wanted to upgrade it on your own post-purchase. Next thing to consider is the simulated benchmarks. We're going to get into Cinebench R23, Geekbench single core, and multi-core. And as you can see in Cinebench R23, the M16 is going to show off more muscle flex, if you were, in Cinebench R23. But as we move towards Geekbench single core, you can see that it steps up the game by about 100 points. Not a lot, but definitely by 100 points, Geekbench single core is better, which means in-app performance, as I was saying earlier, is going to be very similar between these two laptops. However, as we get into the multi-core performance, you see the MacBook Pro really kick it up. So that means multitasking on the MacBook Pro. Let's say you're, running some Spotify music, you have a YouTube video for some research, you got a bunch of Google tabs open, you're running some Excel spreadsheets, you are, in Premiere Pro, editing a video, as well as, creating some resources for that video in Photoshop. The MacBook Pro is going to be much better at multitasking without lagging. Okay, that's what the multi-core benchmark means for those of you who are new to these, simulated benchmarks. All right, let's keep moving forward though into some real world tests and see how these laptops perform in the actual programs. All right, so Puget Systems After Effects benchmark, you're seeing the MacBook Pro get a much higher score, both the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. What this means is you're gonna have a smoother workflow, okay? The day-to-day workflow of using After Effects is gonna be much smoother than the M16. However, as we move into the After Effects render benchmark, you can see that the M16 has slightly better performance with that dedicated GPU. Now, what that means is when you're rendering out your After Effects projects, it's gonna be slightly faster and more efficient with the dedicated GPU in the M16. But day-to-day After Effects workflows, the MacBook Pro, M1 Pro, and M1 Max are gonna be more efficient and run slightly smoother. Slightly smoother, not massively smoother. You have two very comparable laptops as we're discussing here. All right, moving forward into the Premiere Pro 4K to 4K video edits. Moving forward into DaVinci Resolve, it wasn't even a battle. The MacBook Pros just slayed it in DaVinci Resolve for export times. But now let's talk about playback. And if you're considering playback for either of these laptops, the M1 Pro and the RTX 3060 with this i9 11900H and the M16 are very compatible with drop frames in 6K B-RAW and 6K RED footage. The M1 Max, however, is going to do much better playback inside of Premiere Pro with only 9 drop frames for B-RAW, and I'm not sure the exact number for RED, but it's pulled up on the screen now so you can see that. Now moving into the Photoshop benchmark, this is where things get a little tricky, and this could really be said about all of the benchmarks here in Adobe. We are still waiting on the full transition for Adobe to make Apple Silicon native apps. Now what that means is they're currently running on an emulation called Rosetta 2, which means it's taking an Intel-based application, running an emulation to transcode all of the information, and then run the app on Apple Silicon. Okay, now the issue with that is it slows down through that transition, okay? So that means once we have Apple Silicon native apps, things like After Effects, Premiere Pro, and Photoshop will be much better, which means these laptops may in fact absolutely dominate over the M16, and it wouldn't even be a question. However, the biggest question to me is, what is your budget, and do you need that much performance for that much price? Like I said, I think these Apple MacBook Pros are amazing products, but I do think you can get almost as good, if not equal performance out of a slightly more budget-friendly package like the Windows laptop if you're willing to sacrifice being plugged into a charger versus having full power on battery all the time. Again, trying to play the field here as not a fanboy of either one, and I hope you see that in this review. Now, looking at the Photoshop benchmark, you can see that currently the M16 has better performance than both the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. Remember, this is before Apple Silicon native apps, but also keep in mind that the MacBook Pro 16 is running very cool and without any fan noise. The M16 had some fan noise, around 45 decibels during some of the tests in the Puget Systems benchmark of Photoshop, and it's also going to be a warmer, or should I say hotter temperature on the CPU while running that benchmark as well. So again, the battle here is less of which one performs better, and it's more of which one is more efficient overall running these performance benchmarks. All right, now let's shift into the video editing thermals. And how this is gonna work is because the MacBook Pro does not have fan modes, I ran each resolution, 1080p all the way up to 6K, to stress test the laptop against the M16. And for the M16, since it does have fan modes, I went ahead and I ran each of those fan modes for 4K footage to see how well the laptop handled that and the different export times associated. And you can see those results coming up on the screen now. And as you can see, the MacBook Pro handles the thermals and fan noise far better than the M16. Now, if you're somebody who wants great performance on the go, never compromising performance for battery life, has a solid webcam, fantastic screen and screen brightness, keyboard, massive trackpad, then the MacBook Pro is going to be a great option for you. However, you're somebody who has a little less budget on your hands. You still want a solid trackpad, great performance out of a laptop, nice big 16-inch screen, keyboard, and iGPU mode with great battery life, then the M16 is going to be a great option for you as well. It just will save you some bucks. Links if you're ready to make a purchase, likes if this video has brought you some value, and subs if you want to miss out on the future uploads. I'll see you here in the next one.